there and welcome to the GenWealth Radio Hour, starting with the What's Happening segment. My name is Scott Inman. Glad to have you along, whether you're watching on our live stream online, podcast, or radio. Great to have you today. And we've got the financial headlines that you need to know about. We know we are in the middle of March Madness as I welcome in GenWealth co-founder Janet Walker, co-hosting today with me. So maybe that's all you've been thinking about is basketball for the last couple of weeks. Have you been watching any of the games?
Not a lot, but I do have. I have plans to watch on Thursday night.
Yeah.
So get the Razorbacks. Let's keep on going.
Here in Arkansas,
yeah.
we are excited. The Razorbacks in the Sweet 16 taking on Arizona as we do this live. Now, for our radio listeners, we hope we're still playing when you're hearing this on Saturday, but we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, there's still stuff making news that you need to know about, so maybe this is a good time to catch up. We've got a few of those topics to go over in our What's Happening segment today, so let's dive in. Our first one, talking about student loan debt. This one coming from a Market Watch article, and there's the headline. Trump administration looks to shift student loan responsibilities to Treasury Department. Now, so the story here is it's getting a major shakeup, student loans, and it could change who you deal with, how payments are handled, and how the system works going forward. So let me give you a couple of the key takeaways from this article. The Trump administration is exploring, so nothing official yet, moving the federal student loan management from the Department of Education to the Treasury Department, and this would be obviously a structural change in how loans are administered and collected. Now, the Treasury already handles government payments and collections, so certainly this shift signals a stronger emphasis on repayment efficiency and probably enforcement as well. Now, we don't have many details on that, but just looking at this from a high-level view, it's something to pay attention to. There aren't any real action points for anybody if you have a student loan right now, but there is largely, I think, a shift, Janet, back towards away from, I guess, forgiveness and more towards repayment.
Well, and really, this is where we were before the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So much of our life is pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and I think now being 6 years into when COVID started and everything changed, I think that we have forgotten in the world of student loans what it was like before COVID. Mm-hmm. So this is not a Trump new set of rules thing. The department shift we'll talk about separately, but as far as the collection of student loan debt, this is not a new thing. It is a return to what was before. So during the pandemic, President Biden at the time canceled the contracts with student loan debt collection companies. So pre-pandemic, there were actually debt collection companies that were helping to collect student loan debt. You didn't get forgiveness and just walk away and forget it and you get a free college education, woohoo for you. That was not the thing. You had to pay the debt. So we're returning to you have to pay the debt, and people are talking about it like it's new. But guess what? You took out a loan, you owe the loan back plus interest. So that's not really anything new. That the major shift here is really from the Education Department to the Treasury. And for those who are not aware, President Trump made an election promise to eliminate the Education Department with the goal of moving that responsibility and freedom back to the state and local governments, with hopefully some pretty significant elimination of waste and federal spending there, and then also the elimination of federal control. And I come to this mindset as before I was a financial advisor, I was a fourth generation teacher, so from a long line of educators, and I know that a lot of educators might view this differently, and they feel like it's a threat to what they do for a living to eliminate the Education Department. I would look at it the exact opposite way, that it actually gives more freedom and control locally than on a federal level. So decisions still have to be made, funding still has to be there, but it doesn't have to be controlled on a national level. So that's really the big picture. But also, just to take we've talked about President Trump, so like the Republican stance on this, but if we go back to President Carter, I've actually been reading one of his autobiographies recently and have learned a lot, because I was relatively young when he took office, and so this has been a good learning experience for me. But when he was governor of Georgia, he consolidated approximately 300 state agencies, boards, and commissions and got it down to 22 departments, creating a lot of increased efficiency. And so this is, I wanted to share that because this is not a Republican thing. It's not a Trump thing. It's an efficient government thing, and giving control back locally. And on the student loan side, if you take out a loan, I don't care if it's a student loan or a mortgage or what it is, you've taken out a loan, you've agreed to a repayment plan, and you need to honor that. And that's what this is going to boil down to. So I wouldn't respond with fear. They're still going to want to encourage people to go and get a college education, so it's not like you're not going to be able to get a loan. And also, they've been working on this for months. So take a breath, don't panic. Go to work and pay for your education. I thought it was interesting, the quote from the Secretary of Education Department in announcing this partnership. So keep in mind, she knows that she is, if the plan goes as they're thinking, that she's the last Secretary of the Education Department. She's there to shut it down. She says, by leveraging Treasury's world-renowned expertise in finance and economic policy, we're confident that American students, borrowers, and taxpayers will finally have functioning programs after decades of mismanagement. So, yeah, frankly, government's gotten too big, and this is what they're looking at to help narrow it down. What's the impact on you? Frankly, at the end of the day, I don't think it's a lot for most people.
And I think the takeaway that you already mentioned is great. You know, you still have to. I think there are a lot of when we were talking during the Biden administration about forgiving debt and letting people have a free education. I mean, if you believe, and it's fine if you believe this way, that everyone should have a free education, you're going to have to drastically change the infrastructure and the way everything is done in the United States first before you just start forgiving debt. Right now, you got to control what you can control. And if, as you've already said, if you take out a loan, you owe the money. It's kind of similar when we talk about long-term care with our clients, right? They think that they want to put everything in an irrevocable trust to hide it from the nursing home. The nursing home is providing a service. They're going to bill you, and you've got to pay for it. You're responsible for that. Same deal.
I absolutely believe that there's just a bigger picture to this that a lot of people are missing. And you were talking about whether or not people should have free education. We've heard all of our lives there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, there's certainly no such thing as a free college education. Even if we as a nation decide to provide that, where does the funding come from? It has to come from somewhere.
So a larger issue there. Control what you can control. If you take out that student loan, or obviously planning ahead for parents, 529 college education savings to provide for that tuition. Scholarships, really scour that and apply for as many scholarships as you can. But if loan is where you have to go, then just expect to have to pay it back. And I don't think it's going to drastically change how you do that, as long as you have the mindset that you're going to need to do it. All right, our second headline this week. This is from Jerome Powell. He's got an opinion that he warns of new inflation from the Iran conflict as gas prices jump 30%. Also from Market Watch, an article from Market Watch. So really the takeaway here, Jerome Powell, he's an outgoing Fed chair, supposed to leave in May, warning that rising oil prices from the Iran conflict could push inflation higher again. We have really tamed it, certainly way down from its high when we were peaking near double digits about 5 years ago. But these energy shocks from the war has certainly driven oil prices up to over $100 a barrel. As we speak here today, it's down below that again. And gas prices have jumped. And certainly when you think about energy prices as its percentage of CPI, that could definitely make an impact on inflation. But really, if it's going to be true that we're going to have a huge inflation impact, Janet, I think the war is going to have to last for a really long time. And oil prices are going to have to sustain high prices for that gas price to trickle down through transportation costs, which ultimately absolutely would raise prices of other goods and services.
Yeah, groceries, travel, utilities, they're all impacted by gas prices at some point. But I think you're exactly on point that there is a difference between a temporary jump in prices and true inflation.
Yep.
And one does not necessarily lead to the other. So I remember years ago, Scott, when gas prices jumped up over $4 a gallon, mm-hmm. and it's been close to 2 decades. I should have looked up when this was, but it's been quite some time ago. And I remember I had purchased an SUV. And it was the first time I'd owned an SUV, and since then I've always had gas guzzlers. This is just a sacrifice that I'm willing to make in life. I enjoy driving a truck. But at that point, I remember going, oh my gosh, but you know, what I kept telling myself is we budgeted for this, and it's not permanent. It didn't last a long period of time, but it was very real to me at that point because I was driving an SUV. I was the only person working in the family. We had 2 young kids. But we made it, and gas prices did not stay above $4 a gallon. They went back down, and everything was reasonable again. So let's talk about some things that they're not really talking about when they try to scare you with gas prices. U.S. production levels, they have grown over the past 4 years, and in early 2026, the United States remained the world's largest producer and a significant exporter of oil, and I don't think many people talk about that. We sent 128 million barrels of crude oil abroad in late 2025, which provides a buffer to the global markets. It's not enough to prevent these sharp price spikes, but I think we need to understand where we are in personal production in the U.S. and where we're headed.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there were responses early on that a global response. Many countries got together and announced they would be increasing production, which helps ease that challenge of the export of oil, because all this is centered around what comes out of the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz and the conflict that is stopping that transportation. So if you talk about production from the U.S. side, production from other parts of the world, that has helped ease it some. But again, it goes back to the takeaway for us personally when we talk about control what you can control. I don't think this requires drastic change in lifestyle, and we're not going to sit here and tell you, hey, you need to lower your commute and get a different car and all this thing, because it is a short-term shock. Right. And I think when we see this, to your point, when you talked about temporarily topping $4 a barrel, I think the expectation is that's not going to stay there very long. And certainly we've had a lot of progress towards talks that may end the war this week. So it's possible that by this time next week, this is all over, or at least working toward the end of it. And I think that will be a positive response. But I go back to, we haven't seen the results of this yet. What we're seeing is traders' reaction to what might happen. And the trading with oil prices and the spike in that, which has resulted in higher gas prices, is still speculative at this point, as it often is. So hang on, we'll keep that. That'll certainly be an ongoing story to follow. One final topic before we get out of here on the What's Happening segment. From this Instagram post, the U.S. Senate just passed a bill, 89-11, that bans institutional investors from buying single-family homes. All right, so the Senate passed this legislation, still got to go to the House. What they're trying to do is limit large investment firms from buying up large numbers of single-family homes to slow corporate dominance in residential real estate. And this has certainly grown over the last decade. We've seen it. We use some real estate investments here, and we've seen that percentage of their multi-sector portfolios grow for certain. It's not by any means a major component of the real estate investments we use here, but it's there. It's showing up. And I think I'm a little torn on this because I'm always against generally the government putting their thumb on capitalism.
Right.
But I also want people to be able to afford homes, especially first-time home buyers, and this could open up some inventory. I don't think it's going to flood the market. I think people have if they think that if they think that big institutions are gobbling up all the homes, I think that's the wrong perspective. It is not that big a deal, but if left unchecked, it could become one.
I think we're in complete agreement on this. I like you. I love business. I love capitalism. I love the opportunity to grow in ways like that. But I also want to guard the personal finances of the average family. That the first-time home buyer in particular is running into more and more challenges of being able to step into that first home earlier in life because of inflation relative to what their earnings have increased over the years compared to what their parents made, and what the cost of a home and all of the other expenses that go with it, what those were for their parents' generation. So I think it's already challenging enough for first-time homeowners, and I'm actually more of a fan like you said, I'm kind of divided on this, but I lean more in favor of the individual homeowners not having to compete with institutional investors over home prices.
Yeah, inventory could open up some, but again, we know that inventory is really sluggish right now, or tight right now anyway. Interest rates are certainly a barrier, although they are historically at average rates. They are much higher than what people were looking at a few years ago, and comparing that, you see a lot of that out there too that kind of aggravates me. Well, the same priced home now costs you, $600 more a month just because of the interest rates. Well, yeah, it does, but you're going to have to deal with that. I mean, I don't think rates are going back down anytime soon. Well, certainly not to where they were.
And that's been a generational truth, from one time to another. I remember when, like in the 80s, my grandfather was retired, and he was earning double digits on CD rates. At the same time, my dad was buying land and paying double digit interest rates on the loans for the land. And so it depends on where you catch those cycles, but it is a normal cycle. And all of that to say, my dad, who was the one paying it instead of earning it, everything turned out fine long term, but we made some sacrifices for a period of time.
And I'm going to say one thing too. We've talked a lot about, we're going to close this out, but we've talked a lot about homes, the affordability of homes and how challenging it is. And it is true what you said, the wages have not kept up with home prices increasing. But the other thing is we build bigger homes these days.
Yes, we do.
If you go back 40 or 50 years, a first-time home buyer was buying an 800-foot house.
There were no McMansions.
That's right.
It was not a thing.
And a first-time home now is 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet.
Yeah.
And I think if we get home builders, which I think in many pockets of the country they're recognizing this, building newer, smaller homes, then I think affordability would be better there for first-time home buyers.
That's very valid.
All right, that's it for the What's Happening segment. Stay tuned. The Get Ready for the Future show starts right now.
You've been sold the idea that financial independence is all about some number on your account statement, or even worse, that you don't qualify because of where you started out. That's just not true. It's not about some well-kept secret of the wealthy. It's about finding the right information and knowing how to apply it. On the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions so you can start making real financial change today. The journey to true financial independence begins right here, and it starts with you.
Coming to you from the 6th floor of 3 Financial Center in West Little Rock, Arkansas, this is the Get Ready for the Future show, coming to you from GenWealth Financial Advisors, where we exist to help people discover, protect, and share true financial independence. And on the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions about finance, providing some education and hopefully some action points that will further your advancement towards your own financial independence. Welcome in. My name is Scott Inman, along with me, Janet Walker, one of the GenWealth co-founders. As we get set to answer those questions, you ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
Here we go. Deborah's first from Little Rock. I'm 50 and recently divorced. I split retirement assets in the divorce, but now I'm not sure if I'm still on track. How do I rebuild with a 15-year timeline? Thank you, Deborah, for the question. A divorce can seem like it might derail your retirement plan, but it doesn't have to end momentum. So we're going to talk about resetting the course. And first, a personal story here. I married a divorcee, so I understand. She was the breadwinner in the family. I don't know what your situation is, but she had most of the retirement savings. So I know how crushing it felt to her to have to cut those savings in half when she had been the primary builder of it. And then she spent a lifetime accumulating that. And she's not far from your age, Deborah, so I understand what that feeling is, but certainly there's some good news here that we can provide, and some action steps for you that can get you on track. I would say, first of all, the first thing that I think maybe comes to mind for me, it's a simple thing, but you won't likely need as much to retire if you're single as you would have if you were retiring as a couple. So your income need goes down when you won't cut it in half, I don't think, but it does go down.
Yeah, so let's talk about why it's not cut in half. Things like your housing expenses, if you own your home, your property taxes are going to be what they're going to be. And so that's not going to get cut in half. But things like your utilities, you're not using as much water if there's just one person living there instead of two. So there are lots of things, your groceries, that will be greatly impacted by just having one person to support. And frankly, I mean, Scott, you mentioned that you married a divorcee. Deborah, that's also a possibility.
Right.
15 years is a long time relationship-wise, and it may be too early for you to even think about that. But you want to plan to be alone in retirement because you're alone right now. That might also change, though. So just be prepared to plan for you singularly, and then be prepared to plan as a couple if that's something that becomes your reality in the future. But assessing where you are, I think, is your first step to really think about, like, what is your net worth now, updating your budget for a single person, and setting a new retirement timeline. You've already referenced the 15 years, and that may need to stay the same, or it might adjust once you understand what the reality of your situation is, and if you wanted to adjust it forward, or if you needed to adjust it to work a little bit longer. That's something that having a plan can help you determine.
Yeah, Deborah, if you don't work with a financial advisor, we'd be honored to work with you here at GenWealth. You can reach out and walk through the Ready to Retire process with us by calling 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. But if you already do have a plan in place, creating a new one with your new reality after assessing it is certainly important. And when we say that plan, it needs to be your retirement timeline. You've already told us you're looking at 65, taking a look at where you are in retirement savings, what you can do to grow those retirement savings between now and age 65, and what you could assume you would have at age 65, and how much income that would provide you. That's the kind of plan you need. So let's talk about contributions, because you're going to want to grow whatever you do have after the divorce, and you're now 50, you told us. So over 50, you can utilize catch-up contributions to things like your 401k if you have one. There's an $8,000 additional catch-up in 2026, which means you can actually contribute a total of $32,500 annually to your 401k. Maybe you don't have a 401k, or even if you do, you can also utilize IRAs, whether it's a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. The catch-up was actually indexed for inflation in 2026, so your catch-up contribution for being 50 and over is actually $1,100 now. So when that's stacked on top of your annual limit, you can put up to $8,600 in either or a combination of a traditional Roth IRA or a Roth IRA, which we would certainly recommend if you don't exceed income limits. So there are eligibility requirements based on income, but if you can, get some money into the Roth IRA. So that's a lot of money for the next 15 years that can make a huge impact.
It absolutely can. And Deborah, since we're coming right up on April 15th, one thing to consider is whether or not you did an IRA contribution for 2025, either Roth or traditional, because if you have not filed your taxes yet, then you can still do a prior year contribution for 2025 and get basically an extra year in there by contributing to your Roth or traditional IRA. Scott referenced this, but I want you to think about if you have more Roth IRA money at the end when you are retired than you have traditional IRA money, then the opportunity there is you don't have to have as much money set back because you don't have to withdraw as much because it's not taxable to you. So sometimes you can't avoid having more traditional traditional IRAs, either because of where you are income-wise, or that's the match that you're getting in your retirement plan at work. But to the extent that you can influence this reasonably between now and the time that you retire, more Roth money is going to work for your advantage in retirement.
Yeah, and also having an idea of how you're going to leverage Social Security is a huge piece to this too. A lot of people don't know this, but if your marriage lasted 10 years or longer, you may be eligible to claim from your former spouse's benefit at your full retirement age, provided that you have not remarried. So if you were, we don't know, Deborah doesn't say if she was a homemaker, if she had retirement assets, maybe she was also working. But this is really big, Janet, for people, a lot of women who didn't work a lot during the marriage, and they don't have a big Social Security benefit.
Right, and you can claim a lower percentage at an earlier age, but just be aware that this is something that you need to plan for. So as you're thinking through this and you get closer to your 60s, all you need to gather this information, you don't have to be in contact with him. You can go to the Social Security Administration and you take in your marriage certificate and divorce decree. So that's going to show you, or show them, the time period and that it was longer than 10 years. And then have his Social Security number, and they'll be able to give you a printout that just shows, here are the different claiming strategies you can use as a divorced spouse relative to his earnings. And then we as advisors can take that and do an analysis to compare against other Social Security claiming strategies. So just be aware, it is way more than what comes on your Social Security statement.
And one final note before we move on, Deborah, make sure you update your beneficiaries in particular, because as soon as your divorce is finalized, otherwise you run the risk of leaving additional assets, of course, to your ex. So that's something that gets overlooked a lot. And because that, even if you're thinking about it, sometimes we've had a lot of clients that just don't even know where they've got everything when they first come into us. So there can be insurance policies. There can be a lot of things that need updating as well. Thanks for the question, Deborah. And if you want more free info about retirement, investments, and your money, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's not just the Get Ready for the Future show on that YouTube channel. There's lots of free educational resources to help you on your path to true financial independence. Our next question is from Patricia via email. And she writes, I've heard the first few years of retirement are the most financially vulnerable. Why is that? And what can I do about it? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. You're right, Patricia. We're going to focus in on some of the investment reasons that you could be financially vulnerable in the first few years of retirement. The fact is, most investors have most of their wealth inside of their 401ks, and most investors choose their investments on the day they're eligible to participate in the 401k. And oftentimes, Janet, they never look back. They never look at it again. Now, the good news is, if you're in a growth fund or a collection of growth funds and you do that, it can work out. You can, I'm often...
Long term.
Long term. I oftentimes say you can stumble your way to $1 million if you just keep putting money in that 401k.
And with the match, too.
Exactly, because it's all about that contribution rate, and the market has been kind over the last 20 or 30 years of your work life. It's created wealth for you. But in retirement, you are moving from accumulation to distribution, and that is why you can be financially vulnerable in those first few years of retirement. Most investors do not have a large enough nest egg that they can just live off of the interest or the yield or the dividends from their investments and leave the principal alone. Most investors will need to sell investments to generate retirement income, and that is where it gets tricky.
Yeah, we actually had a relatively young person compared to retirees. We had a young person in his late 40s come in and planning ahead. He had received an inheritance, and he's talking with another advisor and with GenWealth, and it took him a while to really understand the difference, and that was on us, it wasn't him, but to really understand the difference between what we do and the approach that this other advisor is taking. And the reason is the other advisor is focused on dividends. And their response was, I'm not going to be able to send you any dividends until we get a year in. Scott, can you imagine if you took a retiree and they've left their job and you can't take income for a year? Like, that's just not going to work. So even people who are planning to utilize dividends, I don't think most people have thought about, you don't have a dividend track record on your investments to be able to pull from that without getting into the principal a little bit initially.
Yeah.
So just like set that aside. That really doesn't even need to be a possibility for you when you're talking about retirement income. So the approach in terms of retirement income that we take is to be able to have a flooring and a bucketing strategy, and it can make all the difference in the world when you talk about this financial vulnerability in early retirement, Patricia. That's the reason we take the approach that we do, because if you don't do that, if you're just selling off, X amount of dollars in your shares of whatever it is that you're holding, if you're just selling that off each month for income, you don't know where the value of that's going to be. And if the value is down, then you're selling more shares than what you would need to otherwise. And that's what gets you into this financially vulnerable situation. So we negate that risk by, number one, making sure that your required sources of income, whatever you have to make ends meet, are covered from guaranteed sources. So things like if you have a pension and Social Security, does that cover the amount of income that you need to have or not? Is there a gap? And then beyond that, we want to have buckets that are for different time periods. So if you think about the money that you're going to use in the first 5 or 10 years, you don't want that exposed to as much volatility as the bucket that you're going to use later. And if you do expose it, again, that's where your financial vulnerability comes in.
We also have a graphic here, if we can get to that, that is an illustration of how that can potentially damage your portfolio, that volatility early in your retirement. So this is a busy looking graphic, but we've got investor A and investor B, okay? And we are using historical returns applied to their portfolios. So they both retired with the same amount of money, okay? So no difference in the way they were invested, and no difference in the amount they had invested. So for our radio listeners, it's $500,000.
And no difference in their income approach.
That's exactly right. They're withdrawing the same amount. So investor A retired in 1966, and we're going to apply those actual historical returns from the S&P 500 and from the bond aggregate index, because this is a 60-40 portfolio, by the way. And investor B retired in 1976. So they took the same amount out of their $500,000, but they got different returns. And you can see on the left, investor A was out of money. They retired at age 65, and they were broke at age 81. Now, obviously, in reality, they would make some changes probably to their withdrawal strategy, but they would have to take a pay cut. If they continued to take the amount they started with, plus indexing for inflation, they would be out of money by 81 if you apply returns from 1966. On the other hand, investor B retired in 1976, 10 years later, and retired into a bull market. You can see that first year she got 20% returns out of her portfolio, and that helped buoy her portfolio all the way through age 85, where she had $1.7 million from that $500,000. So if you do the line at 81, she had 1.2. So different returns. The only difference in two portfolios, one investor was out of money, the other investor had more than double what she started with. Now, that's a very impactful illustration that shows what we call sequence of return risk.
And the returns aren't crazy. Like
No.
the guy who runs out of money has a negative 5% in the first year. It's not like it's a 2008 where the market is down 40%.
Yeah.
So it's not an outside of, reasonable expectations type of situation. And that is why it is critical for investors to understand sequence of return risk, because here's what you can't do. You can't control the market. You don't know what type of market you're retiring into. And you also can't play it so conservatively that you go, well, I'm just going to avoid the downside risk completely. If you do that, you're also not going to have the upside to keep you ahead of inflation. So we have to be able to take on some risk, but manage it in such a way that you're negating the sequence of return risk.
Yeah, sequence of return risk, inflation risk, and longevity risk.
Yes.
Those are the three big risks that you have to solve for in retirement that you didn't have when you were in those accumulation years. So yes, It is a financially vulnerable time, those first few years of retirement, and the antidote to that is a plan, creating a retirement income plan. So if you're listening and you're like Deborah and thinking, how in the world am I going to know how much I can take out? What do I need to take it from? Another thing I'll point out too before we move on here is the 401k, we often say, is a great accumulation vehicle. It's a lousy distribution vehicle. And one of the reasons is the investment selections in there. But the other thing is, if you're going to withdraw from a 401k, most of the time they're going to require that to be a pro rata distribution. So it is very difficult to bucket. You could have a 60-40 portfolio, but you're going to have to take an equal part out of each investment you have. That'll be the 401k rules. In most cases, they don't let you highlight the conservative fund to take all of the money out of and the growth fund to leave alone. So looking into a plan that might be able to allow you to roll your money into an IRA, consolidate it with an advisor, and work with that retirement income plan through the services of the advisor. That's oftentimes what we're doing here at GenWealth. If you'd like to inquire about that process, we call it the Ready to Retire process, and you can reach out and get the ball rolling by calling 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You can also send us an email. Send it to info@getreadyforthefuture.com, and we'll be in touch with you to set that first appointment. It is absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything to sit down with a GenWealth financial advisor and just discuss how we plan, what your goals are, and see if we're a right fit for you. Hey, this is the question of the week. I think I said Deborah sent it in. That was the question before. It's Patricia. Thanks for reaching out with your question, Patricia. We want to send you a free Get Ready for the Future show tumbler for being the question of the week. Just claim it by sending us an email, show@getreadyforthefuture.com. And if you want to win one of those tumblers yourself, you got to step into the question zone. You got to send us one. You can do it sending a text or leaving a voicemail to 501-381-5228. We want to hear from you, 501-381-5228. Our last question today comes from Wayne in Jonesboro, and he writes, we're both 62 and wondering if it's better to take Social Security now or wait until 67. And then he says the break-even math is confusing. Yeah, a lot of people focus in on that. We look at it here. It is a component, but it is not the only thing you should consider when you're trying to determine when to take Social Security. But let's take a look at that. We do have some key break-even points. So if you want to know the answers to that and you think it's confusing, these are general answers. So if you take a look at comparing your benefit at age 62, which is the earliest you can take it, versus 67, which is your full retirement age, but not the latest or not the farthest you can delay it and grow your benefit, the break-even point is about 78 years and 8 months old. So in other words, if you lived longer than 78 years and 8 months, you would make more money by waiting till your full retirement age. If you compared 62 to 70, which I think what he's talking about here, the break-even point occurs between 80 and 81 years old. And then if you compare full retirement age of 67 to the highest benefit you can receive at age 70, the break-even point is around 82 to 83 years old. So that is the break-even math, but it's more than just about the math. We've got a lot of factors that we need to determine that influence your decision.
I had this exact conversation this week. I purchased a new vehicle, and my salesman is 65, and he knows what I do. And so when we were driving around and everything, he was talking about, in a couple of years I'm going to hit full retirement age, and so I think I'm going to take my Social Security check. And I started talking about, okay, but do you understand the difference between full retirement age and what may seem like your full amount for Social Security and what you could get if you delayed it until age 70, because he's still planning to work. And he didn't realize that there was an 8% bonus for waiting each year. So your 100% benefit at your full retirement age of 67, if you delay for 3 years, could be a 124% benefit. So we were talking about the break even, but the direction I went with him, and this may be the case with Wayne. I don't know what your spousal situation is, but in many cases, this is not the case in my family, but in many households, it is still the situation where the male is the higher earner and has been for their lifetime, especially if the wife took off time to be a mom for those early years. So if he has higher earnings, then what happens is when one of them passes away, forget the break-even point.
Yeah.
When one of them passes away, the smaller check goes away and the larger check stays. So it becomes very important in household income planning for the higher earner to delay those Social Security checks coming in for quite a period of time, until age 70 if possible. Now, there are times where the whole plan doesn't come together without us taking Social Security income earlier than that, and that's okay. But you need to know the reason and that it makes sense in your situation. But if you can delay that and you're the highest earning spouse, it makes a tremendous difference long term. And the other thing, Scott, we haven't talked about is the adjustment, any cost of living adjustment that there is to Social Security. Yeah. If you have delayed that, every future cost of living adjustment that you get is off of that higher amount.
Yeah.
So delay if you can, but we understand sometimes you're just like, I need to retire and I've got to have the income. Just be sure you get a plan to go through this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will put this out there, and these are considerations, but they're certainly not the only consideration. But when you think about your health or life expectancy, a lot of people will either, if they expect to live a long life, then delaying can be the better option there. And if they have a big health problem and they don't expect to live a long life, maybe taking it early. But I hate making decisions based in that vacuum either, because you don't know.
No.
I mean, we've seen a lot of people who were in poor health live a lot longer than they were expected to live, and something can happen to somebody who has longevity in their life. They could have an accident. You know, there's not really a lot of, I don't think, bulk behind trying to make the decision based on health status. But where it really is made, the real choice, I think, is made when you're planning to begin taking income from your assets. And I think that's where we hang out when we build that retirement income plan. Hey, if all things being equal, we know that you're going to need, when you retire at 62, $10,000 a month, and you want to plan to delay Social Security until 70, you're going to have to take the $10,000 from your assets for 8 years, assuming there's no other income sources. So then if you take Social Security at 62, and let's say it's $2,500 a month, then you're only going to need to take $7,500 from your assets. And I think that is a huge piece to this. Pushing the can down the road on your assets makes more sense than pushing the can down the road on Social Security. If all things are being equal, you're going to retire and you're going to be taking that money.
Yeah, I think, again, don't look at the Social Security decision as your decision and your spouse's decision separately. It's a household decision because it's household income. And don't look at Social Security separate from everything else. It's important to include that holistically. And Scott, the other thing that I would cover is the concern about that, the government's going to run out of money, that it's not going to be there. And we always tell people, at the end of the day, a politician wants nothing more than to be reelected. And so before they completely run out of money in Social Security, Washington will fix this. They'll wait until the final hour, but they will fix it. And they've done it before. One of the things that you can really understand from the consumer perspective, it used to be that age 65 was max retirement age. They've increased that to 67. That expanded the longevity of the program. And I think with longevity increasing, they'll do something like that again and make some other adjustments to increase, like the earnings that we pay in on Social Security. So there are other adjustments that can be made. We believe it'll be there.
Yeah, we talk about this in previous workshops as we get to our final thoughts here. But when Social Security first came out in the 1930s, you got your benefit at age 65, and life expectancy was 64, right? They had a pretty good thing going back then.
The math was good for them.
So certainly with average life expectancy in the upper 70s now, it makes sense to potentially raise that full retirement age as a fix to Social Security. Time for our final thoughts.
I'm going to hang out on Social Security a little bit longer. One of the other things we didn't talk about for Social Security longevity is that Social Security being, air quotes here, bankrupt is different than an individual being bankrupt, because somebody is still working. You know, the younger generations are still working and paying into the system. So it doesn't mean that a $2,000 check goes to zero. It means a $2,000 check might go to $1,500, but there's still a $1,500 check there. So there's still, again, a lot of planning, a lot of consideration, and we still firmly believe that the government will figure it out before we get to that point.
Yeah, and Social Security, as I kind of enter my final thought, is a big piece to your overall retirement puzzle, so don't neglect making the right decision, but it shouldn't be made in a vacuum. It should be made as part of a holistic overall retirement income plan. And if you don't have one of those retirement income plans, I'm going to ask you again to consider going through the GenWealth Ready to Retire process by stepping into that with a phone call, 866-653-PLAN. It's 866-7526, or you can send an email to get started. Just send that to info@getreadyforthefuture.com, and that's spelled out for FOR, not the number, getreadyforthefuture.com, and ask about your free complimentary first appointment with a GenWealth advisor. And that's all the time we have for this week's Get Ready for the Future show in the GenWealth Radio Hour. We thank you for being with us, and we hope you'll join us again next time, and we hope you'll think about sending a question in. You can call or text 501-381-5228, and we'll talk to you again next time.
The GenWealth financial team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com, or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.